The Western Cape government says it has approached national government for a provincial disaster classification due to flood damage. Earlier this week, thousands of homes were flooded in informal settlements across the province as heavy rains battered the areas. Roads were closed, schools and clinics damaged, and some areas were cut off by flooding. For more on this, we're joined by Provincial Head of Disaster, Colin Deiner. Colin, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for speaking to us. What is the extent of the flooding impact across the Western Cape?
Good afternoon, Hugo, and to your viewers. Yes, it's very extensive. You know, it has affected roads, obviously a lot of informal settlements. In fact, we're close to 100,000 people being affected. Farms, electricity networks, you know, so schools, as you mentioned. So it's been a very broad area of impact. We've had a lot of rain. We haven't seen the total devastation we saw last year, although in Citrusdal we did receive the message this morning that the road linking Citrusdal to the N7 is closed, and we've been focusing quite a lot on the damage of the road there. So it's very widespread. It started raining again in Cape Town about 10 minutes ago, quite heavily. So, you know, we still have 2 warnings going into today and tomorrow.
Now, Colin, you talk about devastation last year and that this year's levels have not reached what you experienced last year. Have you learnt any lessons from last year's devastation? Are you better prepared?
Yes, I think we are. You know, what we do, Hugo, is every time we have an incident, a major incident like last year, we had the 2 big floods in June and September. We bring in all our stakeholders afterwards and we do a thorough debrief, and we're very honest in those debriefs about what did we do right, what did we do wrong, you know, what could we have done quicker. And we've added that to this operation, you know, as we go ahead. We've already had, this is our 3rd flood this year. So, you know, we believe we're improving. Obviously, this is a disaster. So, you know, it's not something you can prepare 100% for, because there will always be those outlying issues that will come in that you need to deal with. So, but we believe that our system in the Western Cape is strong. We've worked on it for many years, and it's very responsive. You know, we got the warnings on Thursday already. We met Thursday, Friday, and started planning for this. So although it's a big operation, a massive incident, there are many people involved. And you know, that's the way we approach it.
Let's talk about casualties. Have you lost any lives? Obviously, this is something that you always try to prevent, even if it's due to factors that largely cannot be prevented.
Absolutely. We have sadly lost at this stage. The information that we have is 2 lives. Both have been drownings, singular events. We had one in the city and we had one up in the West Coast. So those are the only 2 lives that we've lost. We've had a number of rescue operations, but they've mostly been rescues of people stranded on high ground that we've had to move out. So there's been the province's emergency medical services, aeromedical teams have evacuated a few people, and the South African Police Services divers have assisted us as well to carry out some of those operations. So the death rate is very low, but you'd obviously want to keep it to 0. And we're not out of it yet. So the focus still has to be very much on our first priority, which is saving lives.
Colin, walk us through some of the interventions you've had to carry out to deal with the 100,000 individuals that have been displaced. I think that's a number you indicated has been affected by these floods over the last few days.
Yeah, Hugo, so it's close to that. I think the first intervention was on Thursday night, where Ward 99 in Khayelitsha, there was the wind actually came through. We hadn't had rain yet. There were 4,000 people affected there. And then, you know, progressively, as we've had the storms come through, we've had a lot of low-lying areas, Dunoon, Gugulethu, you know, a couple of the Macassar. I can go on. There's about 70 areas that were affected. So what we do is we establish what we call a joint operations center, and we bring in all the stakeholders. So we then divide them up into what we call clusters. So just real quick, the humanitarian cluster looks after providing food, providing, you know, blankets, baby kits. That is their responsibility. Then we have a shelter cluster who are responsible for providing shelter. Now they are the humanitarian cluster, for example, gets managed by the Provincial Department of Social Development, but we have Gift of the Givers, Al Imdad Foundation, AfriForum. We have all those organizations working there, so we can coordinate the distribution of food and of humanitarian relief supplies. So that's been a huge operation. I think around about yesterday, the report was that 200,000 hot meals had already been provided over this period. Now, if I say almost 100,000 people affected, it doesn't mean it's 100,000 people displaced. It's people that could have had only minor damage to their homes, but all the way through to people who had to be sheltered. So that's been one of the operations that's been carried out. Shelter is another issue. Shelter's been identified. The National Department of Human Settlements have an emergency housing team. They came down from Pretoria to assist us. They've been here for quite a while, and they've been assisting in identifying shelters and moving people into the shelters. City of Cape Town has also provided transport and shelter to move people from the affected areas into the shelters. So I think, Hugo, you can see it's a broad operation. We've also had to up in the Cedarburg, and Citrus Dal has been cut off. The police helped us this morning with their boats to get in there. We've flown some patients out with our aeromedical helicopters. We haven't been able to get in there with helicopters due to the weather, but we do have our own contracted helicopters on standby if it's necessary.
Colin, we don't want to keep you too much longer. We know you have an incredible amount of work still to do. But just very, very lastly, let's talk about the impact that all of this has on children, on women, on the aged, on those that are sickly. Now, it always isn't a priority where you are evacuating people to immediately attend to the needs of those that want to go to school, have lost their books and so on. How are these taken into account? Are they prioritized at all?
They are. Hugo, I think what is important is within the big joint operational structure, and I must say there's about 70 different agencies in there, from government to NGO. And we do have Department of Education are in that structure. And we have NGOs in that structure looking after things like children, people with disabilities. I just saw on the list, how many wheelchairs have been provided. So we've got to understand that in a situation like this, cold, wet, high winds, the most vulnerable people are the ones that we are going to have to prioritize. So it's always looking at, you can't let people wait, because if somebody's going to be affected this morning at 2:00 and it's an old person or it's a child, you don't have much time to be able to deal with it and get that person to safety. And that's why that always has to be sort of top of our priority list when we do that. And to make sure that whatever you give that person from a humanitarian side is something that will be able to be used, that we're not matching, and sending the wrong kind of resources into specifically cut off areas where we have limited cargo space, to help people with.
Colin, very quickly, you've are intending or are approaching national government to declare the province a state of disaster. How far have you gone in doing this?
Yes, so it's gone actually very well, and we really want to thank the National Disaster Management Centre. We received the letter yesterday where it is classified. It's a bit of a legal process to go through. It needs to be gazetted. That will be done on Monday by the Premier of the province. It's not, it doesn't delay anything. The classification and the declaration is really for us to be able to access, additional funding, to move our own funding around. But in the disaster management legislation, it allows us, whenever an incident like this happens, to treat it like a disaster. So the fact that we've got to go through a bit of a legal process does not stop us from doing anything. We do whatever is necessary. So we have the approval from the National Disaster Centre to declare the disaster. We are going through the process now of gazetting it. It will be gazetted by early next week. I believe it will be by Monday. And then, we can follow the legal process in terms of assessing damage, assessing costs, etc.